Everyone, this is Alex. We are doing chapter 23 of Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Now, the way we're going to do it today is we're going to go through the chapter itself, completely dry, and then we will go back. I might consult my notes, and we'll do some actual explaining, and we'll investigate what we think McCarthy is trying to convey in this chapter. And I do notice that through each chapter, there tends to be a particular theme or a particular message, as any chapter should be. But it is interesting that such a peculiar story is divided up into these kind of like 23 essays with an epilogue. And I think that's what the final one is. It is a bit of an essay and it is a bit of a conclusion, but we're going to look into why it is such a vague conclusion and why it does not have the Miltonian kind of ending that we thought it would have, why it ends in a very T.S. Eliot kind of way, if you would. This is the way the world ends, kind of feeling at the end. Now, I noticed that my passenger video has 666 views on it. Please don't watch it anymore. I'd like to preserve that number. If I see a 7 or an 8 at the end, I'm going to delete the channel. And if I see a 69 anywhere on my channel, I'm just leaving the country. I can't live like that. In chapter 23, we jump ahead to 1878. The kid is now referred to as the man. He is 45 years old. Notably, he is not 33, which you'd expect for someone who is a bit of a messiah, and he is quite a messiah. He was born in 1833. That might be somewhat of a reference, but that's because there was a Leonid shower, so 12 and 1. 6 and 1, I'm sorry. In the late winter of 1878, he was on the plains of North Texas. It's going to say that he no longer recognizes this country. While he is camping out, he sees a fire down the prairie, and it's a buffalo hunter. At this time, we learn that most people in the area are involved in exterminating the buffalo. The guy talks about how all around the clock, week in, week out, day in, day out, they're simply shooting buffalo. And I'm not sure if you're aware, and if you'd like to learn more, Butcher's Crossing by John Williams is a in-depth look at how they would hunt these animals. And it's interesting that McCarthy doesn't mention that the way they do it, or the way it was done in that book at least, and a very common way to do it, was you trap the buffalo in a gorge or in a valley, and you put them in a panic so that you are in this direction, and you are, for example, shooting a rifle, which they're going to run away from, but they can't find an exit. So they're going to run in a circle, literally like the death march that ants do. They're going to just be running in a circle, and all you do is sit there and take pot shots. And sometimes people would chase them. Sometimes people would send them off a cliff if possible, but that was a very common way to do it. So it says that men's shoulders and arms were blue and yellow from shooting the Sharps rifle. Wagons shipping out millions and millions of rounds of ammunition, and then shipping back, again, millions of dead buffalo. Let's see. And then he came upon bone pickers, people who are stacking up the bones of the creatures themselves. And very notably, the creatures are already dry and eaten down to the bone. I mean, this is already history. It's already in the past. There are some kids sitting on top of a mountain of bones looking down at him like he's the weird one. Eventually, he makes another fire, and he is approached by a group of kids who are, I think, between 12 and 14 years old. The youngest is 12, I believe. And these kids ask him what outfit he's a part of. The kid, now the man. I'm going to just say the kid and then correct myself every time, because if I just say the man, you don't know who I'm talking about. And now if I say the kid, you don't know who I'm talking about, which I think might be intentional on McCarthy's part. They ask him for tobacco, whiskey. He says, are you guys down with meanness? And they say, we don't hold with it. So these kids are not necessarily out to embrace the degeneracy of mankind. They still have a bit of they're still just kids. They ask him for whiskey again. They ask if he's going to Griffin. He says maybe. He says they're full of whores over there, which says a lot. It is interesting how they mention this to him. he says he's headed towards Griffin. He says, I am. They say, going for whores, I'll bet you. He ain't going for the whores. It's full of whores, Griffin is. They confirm he's going there, and they provide a reason why. And then the kid is going to go to, isn't it Fort Worth at the end? And he's going to go to a tavern, and he's going to go up with a whore, even though he denies it, or he doesn't say it. So many times throughout this book, there are people or things that are determining what the kid is doing almost unconsciously. Weird. They hang out with him for a while, and then there's one whose name is Elrod. They ask him about where he bought the necklace of ears, which I believe came from David Brown, I believe. And they make up some ideas, like, it must be cannibals, maybe he's a cannibal, maybe he was a bounty hunter, maybe he killed the people and took the ears. The kid, or the man, says, no, it was my friend's, years and years ago, and he had the necklace, and then he was hanged. I watched him hang, and then I bought the necklace off of someone in the market, and now it's mine again. Or now it's mine. And they don't believe him. This Elrod kid denies it. He says, that can't be. And Elrod confirms he's 15. Says he's never been shot. And the kid says, I was shot when I was 15. The protagonist, the kid or the man, survived that shot because he was nursed back to health by a woman in New Orleans. And then he leaves, at which point he is divorced from his origins. Elrod really gets in an argument with him, and then they all leave later while the kid is sleeping, and he's hidden himself a little bit because he is afraid that the kid will come back and get him. Elrod, the 15-year-old boy, comes back with a rifle and tries to shoot him. He shoots Elrod dead. After he is shot dead, the kids come up and say, oh, let us see. And Elrod's younger brother is there too, who is 12, named Randall. The kids tell the protagonist, they come out here from Kentucky, mister. This tyke and his brother, his mama and daddy, both dead. His granddaddy was killed by a lunatic and buried in the woods like a dog. He's never knowed good fortune in his life, and now he ain't got a soul in this world. And someone says, Randall, the younger brother, take a good look at the man that has made you a orphan. The orphan in his large clothes, holding the old musket with its mended stock, stared at him woodenly. So we are blaming the protagonist for killing Elrod, even though Elrod pretty much agitated and perpetrated this, in a way. And Elrod is lying there very respectably, like with his hands over his chest, probably where he got shot. And so this kid is this poor victim of history. Really, he's been made into a savage by what he has experienced. His whole family has been murdered randomly for no particular reason. And now he gets into this fight, and it ends up being the last thing he ever does. And it's almost this lineage of violence, this lineage of misfortune or tragedy, which we will return to. They take the rifle, they mention Griffin again, and then in the afternoon, he rode through the Mackenzie crossing of the Clear Fork of the Brazos River. He and the horse walked side by side down the twilight toward the town where in the long red dusk, in the darkness, the random aggregate of the lamps formed slowly a false shore of hospice cradled on a low plain before them. It's like a moth going to the light. And we've already seen a reference to the buffalo who are being slaughtered in large numbers. And now this kid who seems to be repeatedly denying what he's doing, denying what other people are saying he's doing, but he goes and does it anyway. They passed enormous ricks of bones. They? Who's they? I think he went with the kids or something. They entered the town in a light rain falling. The horse nickered and snuffed shyly at the hocks of other animals. Standing at stall before the lamp-like bagnios, they passed. Someone playing a fiddle. They go into a tavern. He goes up and orders a drink. What the kid does, it says the bar was covered with zinc, and he placed his elbows upon it, spun a silver coin, and slapped it flat and passed it to the bartender. He flipped a coin, or he spun a coin. He provided the answer, and he did not look at the answer. just like in the beginning, he didn't look at the tarot, or he turned the tarot card back over. The Four of Cups, which I'll have to look through my notes again, but I have what that means. It's a very specific meaning. So when he slaps the coin down and passes it to the bartender says, "Speak or forever," which is what you'd say at a wedding, which we'll get to. And then it could be at a funeral as well. He could be his own funeral. The kid says, "A whiskey it is." And so he takes the drink. He looks around just with his elbows in the bar, and he sees the judge sitting at a table. The judge is already staring at him. And the kid, that must be the most terrifying, horrible. He wore a round hat with a narrow brim, and he was among every kind of man: herder, bullwhacker, drover, freighter, miner, hunter, soldier, peddler, gambler, drifter, drunkard, thief. The idea that we are naming off everyone you can imagine in society is among, the judge is among them. It's as if, and let's see, herder, someone who controls animals; bullwhacker, someone who controls bulls; a drover, a freighter, a miner, a hunter. It's all people who are involved in moving things, in controlling things. Hunter, who kills; soldier, who kills for money; peddler, who sells things; gambler, who risks and game; drifter. So generally it's describing the kinds of people who would be gravitated to this kind of a world, this kind of a man, if that's what he is. "And he was among the dregs of the earth in beggary 1,000 years, and he was among the scapegrace scions of eastern dynasties, and in all that motley assemblage he sat by them, and yet alone, as if he were some other sort of man entire, and he seemed little changed or none in all these years." So the kid looks away, and then he looks back to see the judge has walked away. Now, in this tavern, I forgot to mention, there is a showman. It's an old man who's holding out his hat and collecting money. On the stage behind him, with these little lights along the stage, is a young girl who is doing the crank organ, and then there is a bear dressed in crinoline. It's literally a bear in a giant, ridiculous skirt. The bear is dancing to the music. Now, the judge gets up from the table. The kid notices that the other people at the table are standing up suddenly, and they are arguing with the showman, the man who is in charge of the dancing bear. One of the men from the table takes out his gun and shoots the bear. Now, what is interesting is the bear keeps dancing faster. So he is shot, and he just keeps dancing. This would indicate that an animal of this kind is going to be trained through pain. You're going to whip the bear to teach him what to do. And so this bear interprets this as a reason to dance faster. We see a creature who in chapter 11 was wild and dragged away one of the Delawares from the Glantons, is now caged, is now trained. He is a cartoon of what he formerly was. It's not the same bear, it's just bears in general. And we're going to hear about bears again later on. Now, a bunch of people are screaming and saying, "Oh my goodness, someone took the gun from the man." The man ended up shooting the bear dead. It's interesting that many bullets in chapter 11 could not take down that bear. But in this one, only 2 bullets killed the bear. It could be that the bear's heart is worn down. Another kind of clay. A bunch of women come up, and they are like, "Good Lord." This one woman mounted to the boards and stepped past the bear and held out her hands. "It's all over," she said. "It's all over." And then we hear, "Do you believe it's all over, son?" It's the judge walking up behind the kid and saying, "Do you believe it's all over?" Which is to say, the idea that the show is over. So that's what the woman is saying. The show is over. It's all over. And the judge is here to say, no, there will be even more of a show. Fortunately, thank God. I'm not blowing all my money on whiskey just to have the bear die. He turned. The judge was standing at the bar looking down at him. He smiled. He removed his hat. The great pale dome of his skull shone like an enormous phosphorescent egg in the lamplight. "The last of the true," says the judge. "The last of the true. I'd say they're all gone under now, saving me and thee, would you not?" He's referring to the scalpers. The kid tries to see past him. The great corpus enshadowed him from all beyond. He could hear the woman announcing the commencement of dancing in the hall to the rear. So essentially what's happened is, okay, the bear's dead, so we're going to go do dancing in the hall over there. And they're going to be selling chits to get in the door. Then the judge says, a line from Shakespeare, and some are not yet born who shall have cause to curse the Dauphin's soul. Plenty of time for the dance. This is from Henry V, and it's the Dauphin, who's the son of King Charles, who is agitating King Richard of England. That eventually causes, I think, the war. And the Dauphin is like a little Caligula. He's very proud. He loves his horse. He just does all of this out of spite. He simply likes to assert himself by agitating. So the real players in Henry V are King Charles, King Richard. Henry is this ascendant character. The Dauphin saying that there are not yet born who shall have cause to curse him. That is to say that he wants to get revenge against the King of England by creating this war or by agitating him. He sends him like joke gifts and things like that. And that down the line, down the ancestry of the English, or down the ancestry of King Richard, there are people who are going to curse him in retrospect because of what he caused. This would be, in a way, referring to the judge's role in history, agitating people or getting them to commit these acts of violence. Or it could be, as I believe, the determination of history for which the judge kind of acts as this representative. And again, as a judge, you would assume that the connotation is we're going to look at the facts, we're going to have a jury, where there's going to be a verdict on something that is going to happen. And so I believe the judge is really there to simply frame what is otherwise true in the way in which it seems undeniable. And this idea of something being beyond a reasonable doubt, or I think it's really solidified in the example of the cold forger. When the kid is in San Diego, he's getting treated. They give him ether, and he has a dream that the judge is overlooking this guy stamping coins, and it says, of this is the judge. Judge creating this binary system, essentially, as he himself will attest to, either guilty or innocent, and we're going to discuss what makes a man guilty in his eyes. The Tyrolean, I believe the old man, bent over the bear. Girl was sobbing, the front of her dress dark with blood. The judge leans across the bar and seizes the bottle, snapped the cork of it with his thumb, and then he takes a swig. The kid says, I gotta go. The judge is like, go? What do you mean? The kid tries to wheedle out. It refers back to the woman who is holding the bear's head and is still in its skirt. And, and the judge is just kind of drinking. He says, drink up, drink up. This night thy soul may be required of thee. The judge is just watching him. Was it your idea that if you did not speak, you would not be recognized? The kid says, you seen me. The judge ignored this. I recognized you when I first saw you, and yet you were a disappointment to me, then and now. Even so, at the last I find you here with me. The kid says, I ain't with you. The judge says, raises his brow, not. The kid says, I never come here hunting you. The judge says, what then? What would I want with you? I come here the same reason as any man, says the kid. The judge says, and what reason is that? What reason is what? That these men are here. The kid says, they come here to have a good time. The judge watched him. He began to point out various men in the room and to ask if these men were here for a good time or if indeed they knew why they were here at all. The kid says, everybody don't have to have a reason to be someplace. That's so, said the judge. They do not have to have a reason. But order is not set aside because of their indifference. So as we see throughout the book, the judge is here to represent the degeneracy of mankind as something that is, you can't stop it. It's inevitable. Order is not set aside because of their indifference. This is to say that in the sense of the sun going down, the redness in the west, that this is a natural process. It's going to happen whether you like it to or not, and there is no salvation. Now, what would be the salvation in a situation like this? He regarded the judge warily. Let me put it this way, said the judge. If it is so, that they themselves have no reason, and yet are indeed here, must they not be here by reason of some other? And if this is so, can you guess what that other might be? No, can you? The judge simply says, I know him well. Him, I think, might refer to death. I think that's what he's saying. On the judge's rifle, doesn't it have Et in Arcadia ego inscribed in it, which is an even in Arcadia I am here, which is a painting meant to warn people in paradise or in this idyllic situation that death is always present. And in the famous painting, I think in the 1600s, it shows this woman who is kind of resigned, like, good Lord, you know. It's one of these strangely evocative paintings, the Ed in Arcadia ego. The judge poured a tumbler full once, took a drink. The judge says, this is an orchestration for an event, for a dance. In fact, the participants will be apprised of their rules at the proper time. For now it is enough that they have arrived, as the dance is the thing with which we are concerned and contains complete within itself its own arrangement in history and finale. There is no necessity that the dancers contain these things within themselves as well. In any event, the history of all is not the history of each, nor indeed the sum of those histories, and none here can finally comprehend the reason for his presence, for he has no way of knowing even in what the event consists. In fact, were he to know, he might well absent himself, and you can see that that cannot be any part of the plan, if plan there be. Then he took a drink. An event, a ceremony, the orchestration thereof. The overture carries certain marks of decisiveness. It includes the slaying of a large bear. The evening's progress will not appear strange or unusual, even to those who question the rightness of the events so ordered. Now, they are essentially continuing to feed, like, okay, guys, I'm so sorry that this happened. We're going to have a dance in the back. So they just want to dance. They want to let out their kind of mortal, that's what you do when you dance. My idea, as we'll get into, is dancing and this kind of expression is you are expressing pain, or you are expressing suffering, you are expressing this injustice through the performative act. You are commenting on it through the act. It is the triumph of happiness and rapture in spite of sorrow. And it's something that, if done, all the time, would be perverse and fetishistic. But of course, there has been a sorrowing tonight, and then there will be a rapture as well. A ceremony, then, one could well argue that there are not categories of no ceremony, but only ceremonies of greater or lesser degree. In deferring to this argument, we will say that this is a ceremony of a certain magnitude, perhaps more commonly called a ritual. A ritual includes the letting of blood. Rituals which fail in this requirement are but mock rituals. Here every man knows the false at once, never doubt it. That feeling in the breast that evokes a child's memory of loneliness, such as when the others have gone and only the game is left with its solitary participant, a solitary game without opponent, where only the rules are at hazard. Don't look away. We are not speaking in mysteries. You of all men are no stranger to that feeling, the emptiness and the despair. It is that which we take arms against, is it not? Is not blood the tempering agent in the mortar which bonds? The judge leaned closer. What do you think death is, man? Of whom do we speak when we speak of a man who was and is not? Are these blind riddles, or are they not some part of every man's jurisdiction? What is death, if not an agency, and whom does he intend toward? Look at me. The kid says, I don't like craziness. Now, I remember back in chapter 9, there's this half-breed boy who is found with his neck broken, and he was clearly raped in the night. And the men there look at the corpse and they comment on the boy's, as McCarthy writes, virtues and merits, as if seeing this dead kid was a reason to appraise him, as if, oh man, he was great, he didn't deserve this. And we see that you don't really pity someone in this book. You don't really feel bad for someone until they are dead. And near the beginning, right when the kid joins the Glantons, they come across this woman who's lying on the sand. It says her paps are very disgustingly just kind of, useless paps are kind of resting on the earth, and almost out of pity or something, I think Glanton just shoots her through the head. And it's this grotesque humanity on display. And we get a lot of insight here. A ritual includes letting blood. Here every man knows the false at once, never doubt it, that feeling in the breast that evokes a child's memory of loneliness, such as when the others have gone and only the game is left with its solitary participant. So it's like, you know when something is not really a ritual, there has to be some kind of blood. And it's many times throughout this book, we see this inversion of something that is sorrowful or serious into something that is happy, as if it really can change on a dime. The judge himself is perversely obsessed with violence and committing the act. The kid says, I don't like craziness. The judge says, nor I, bear with me. Look at them now. Pick a man, any man. That man there, see him, that hatless man. You know his opinion of the world. You can read it in his face, in his stance. Yet his complaint that a man's life is no bargain masks the actual case with him, which is that men will not do as he wishes them to do, have never done, never will do. That's the way of things with him in his life, is so balked about by difficulty and becomes so altered of its intended architecture that he is little more than a walking hovel, hardly fit to house the human spirit at all. So this man has been so disgraced, he has become so far away from what he thought his life should be, that the human condition, the entropy that he has suffered, is put him in a place where he can't simply rejoin society again. He can't just go up and get a job. I mean, it's exactly like with the kid. His family life is screwed. He killed his mother in childbirth, and I believe that he still harbors sympathy and softness for her throughout the book and may guide his moral outlook. But he ran away and he became a completely different person. And yet the kid, I believe, is true because he doesn't feel bad for himself. And I think that's the main thing. He doesn't buy into this sorrow. He doesn't buy into this idea that this is it. I mean, I'm screwed. This is screwed. The bear's dead. We're all screwed. And it's this kind of perversity of like, well, in one sense, you can't go around feeling bad for yourself, but it's insanity to take pleasure in these things as well. And of course, a healthy person would say like, well, okay, I lost this, but let's look on the bright side. But they would do it in a qualified kind of manner, just like when someone passes away, you think, man, I'm affirmed in my love for them, because they're gone, but I still have to acknowledge that it's sad they're gone. This is like a complete perversion of that, in which I believe the kid lives in this state of having done something that he didn't want to do. That was how he was initiated into the world. He has no part of his life has any proper intent. And I think the issue of this man they're looking at is that he really did harbor ideas like, my life still has a chance. Like I can, it still might come out good, but again, he's kind of buying into this anomie, the sense that he hasn't gotten what he wanted and he's sitting there like that, Can he say, such a man, that there is no malign thing set against him, that there is no power and no force and no cause? What manner of heretic could doubt agency and claimant alike? Can he believe that the wreckage of his existence is unentailed, no liens, no creditors, that gods of vengeance and compassion alike lie sleeping in their crypt, and whether our cries are for an accounting or the destruction of the ledgers altogether, they must evoke only the same silence, and that it is this silence which will prevail. To whom is he talking, man? Can you see him? The judge is saying, like, this guy will never come into a point where he's saying, none of this matters. My life took this course for no particular reason. I'm not a victim of anything. It's just how it worked out. He can never accept the world for what it is, which I believe the judge can do, and that's why he's kind of liberated. The judge honestly doesn't hold grudges. He kind of encourages violence. He kind of encourages this as a way to show it's okay. Embrace the will, and that is what the judge is the embodiment of the will. And it is terrifying, as any rational person would think, to see the will triumph in the way it does. And the kid, I believe, is torn between, do I want to embrace the will? Do I want to create what I believe should be? Or would it be more moral to just drift around, accept things for how they are without being involved? I believe that the kid does not want to embrace the will. That is what he has renounced, in fact, and that is for what he will be judged. This man sitting there, I don't think he has renounced his will, or maybe he's just about there. But his mistake is he thinks this is all for some cosmic reason. He's trapped in this emotional and this moral prison. And the judge is just mocking him for even holding these ideas. I mean, as if to mock his sense of right and wrong. Now the man there was indeed muttering to himself and peering balefully around the room, wherein it seemed there was no friend to him. It seemed there was no friend to him. And I believe the judge's presence here is to show there is a friend here. It's okay. The man seeks his own destiny and no other, said the judge. Will or nil. That's the crucial point of this book. Will or nil. You either will what you want in this God-forsaken world, or you resign yourself to death. Any man who could discover his own fate and elect, therefore, some opposite course could only come at last to that self-same reckoning at the same appointed time. For each man's destiny is as large as the world he inhabits, and contains within it all opposites as well. The desert upon which so many have been broken is vast, and calls for largeness of heart, a completion of the initial exposition of the heart as another kind of clay. But it is also ultimately empty. It is hard, it is barren, its very nature is stone. So essentially in a complete vacuum, in an environment that negates everything about the human being. How do you preserve yourself against it? And any man who could discover his own fate and elect therefore some opposite course could only come at last to that self-same reckoning at the same appointed time. So resigning yourself to death because you don't accept your fate. It seems like rescinding, denying what is ultimately true is a death sentence. He poured the tumbler full, drink up, he said, the world goes on. So when he says, do you believe it's all over, son? No, the world goes on. We have dancing nightly, and this night is no exception. The straight and the winding way are one, and now that you are here, what do these years count since we last two met together? Men's memories are uncertain, and the past that was differs little from the past that was not. So this is to say, the straight and the winding way are one. They end up at the same place no matter what. So denying your fate, again, denying the order of things means nothing. You're going to end up at the same place. And remember in chapter 3 at the very end, they encounter, I believe, him with the kid with Captain White, encounters a Mennonite. The Mennonite is drunk and he says, there is no such joy in a tavern as on the road thereto. So the real joy, the happiness, the test, if you would, is on the road to the tavern. And I think it does set us up to think there's going to be a tavern scene eventually, and something very important will happen there. There are many taverns along the way, lots of important things that decide the gang's fate within them, like shooting the bartender, I believe, because he was racist, which is so ironic. But here we see the final meeting of the two who survived. The past that was differs little from the past that was not, I believe, because no matter what, the kid harbors fear and regret from the past. And I believe the observation of a past, the observation of a future is fraudulent and pointless in the mind of the judge. The past only exists because we believe it exists as so. And again, as I would assert, this book would hold in a very postmodern way. There's no such thing as history aside from the actual present. History is the way a thing is done. History itself, the study, is there to show how things are done over time. The arbitrariness of time is there as a scaffold, as a framework. Ultimately, it is an insight into human nature. The judge here represents this essential, this most minimal and perfect human nature, crafted by time, crafted by our experiences, warfaring, agitating to violence and things like that. That I believe the kid would like to find a refuge to. The kid says, I've been everywhere. This is just one more place. Again, a play on words, one more place. The judge arched his brow. Did you post witnesses, he said, to report to you on the continuing existence of those places once you'd quit them? As if those places don't exist anymore. That's crazy, says the kid. Is it? Where is yesterday? Where is Glanton and Brown? And where is the priest? He leaned closer. Where is Shelby, whom you left to the mercies of Elias in the desert? And where is Tate, whom you abandoned in the mountains? Where are the ladies? Ah, the fair and tender ladies with whom you danced at the governor's ball when you were a hero anointed with the blood of the enemies of the republic you'd elected to defend. And where is the fiddler? And where the dance? Now, he is not saying that you should be guilty of these things. He's saying you should be guilty of ever holding these things in esteem. You should be guilty of even maintaining memory of these things. The past that was differs little from the past that was not. The kid says, I guess you can tell me. I tell you this, the judge says, as war becomes dishonored and its nobility called into question, those honorable men who recognize the sanctity of blood will become excluded from the dance, which is the warrior's right, and thereby will the dance become a false dance and the dancers false dancers. And yet there will be one there always who is a true dancer. And can you guess who that might be? The kid says, you ain't nothing. The judge says, you speak truer than you know. Now, this I think is one of those linchpins of the book. You ain't nothing. You could take that as a double negative, or you could say, yes, he is less than nothing. The judge says, you speak truer than you know, but I will tell you, only that man who has offered up himself entire to the blood of war, who has been to the floor of the pit and seen horror in the round, and learned at last that it speaks to his inmost heart, only that man can dance. Now, saying you speak truer than you know, I believe this can mean one of two things. Either, like I've mentioned, the judge is aware that the kid is aware of something without having the qualification to show that it is true. The kid knows it, but he only knows it by nature of the thing. The judge could demonstrate it, the judge could explore it, the kid could not. So he is accessing a truth without even knowing it. The other thing is, I believe the kid generally is conscious and aware and clear on all these things, even that the judge is talking about. He understands it's all nonsense. The kid doesn't find any glory in war. It's simply something that he was honestly saved from slavery and brought into the scalpers. And so, the fact that he didn't become what the judge wanted him to be is, again, going to confirm the judge's prophecy by providing someone who is to be sacrificed. And we will go into how that works. Then the kid says, even a dumb animal can dance. The judge set the bottle on the bar. He has at this point consumed a whole bottle of whiskey. Hear me, man, he said, there is room on the stage for one beast and one alone. All others are destined for a night that is eternal and without name. One by one they will step down into the darkness before the foot lamps. Bears that dance, bears that don't. Now, we'll come back to this because it's too much to talk about. He drifted with the crowd toward the door at the rear. In the anteroom sat men at cards, dim in the smoke. He moved on. A woman was taking chits from the men as they passed through to the shed, so he buys a ticket to get into the dance hall, even though he says that he doesn't want to go dance. Again, someone telling him that he's wanting what he's going to do, and then he does it anyway. And then a dark little dwarf of a whore took his arm and smiled up at him. I seen you right away, she said. I always pick the one I want. She led him through a door where an old Mexican woman was handing out towels and candles, and they ascended like refugees of some sordid disaster. The darkened plankboard stairwell to the upper rooms. Lying in the little cubicle with his trousers about his knees, he watched her. He watched her take up her clothes and don them, and he watched her hold the candle to the mirror and study her face there. She turned and looked at him. Let's go, she said. I got to go. The kid says, go on. She says, you can't stay here. Come on, I got to go. He sat up and swung his legs over the edge of the little iron cot and stood and pulled his trousers up and buttoned them and buckled his belt. His hat was on the floor, and he picked it up and slapped it against the side of his leg and put it on. A lot of people say the kid wasn't able to perform at this time. I don't see any indication of that. Yeah, I think he did it. And I think that was it. He just did it. Dawned to a candle the mirror, study her face. I mean, she would have to. I think her makeup got messed up, so she had to see if it got messed up. That means they probably did something. I don't know. I don't think it's determinate. And I think you're supposed to just say, right, he went up with a whore, and again, she chose him. That was the point. Just like how the judge was staring at him. And he has admitted that he's just kind of giving in to people. Or he doesn't admit it, but he has to admit it to himself eventually. You need to go down there and get you a drink, she said. You'll be all right. He says, I'm all right now. It may be that he broke out crying, or maybe he had anxiety and he couldn't perform. Who knows? He went out, he turned at the end of the hallway and looked back. Then he went down the stairs. She had come to the door. She stood in the hallway holding the candle and brushing her hair back. The best I could say is I think he told her, like, look, you don't have to do this if you don't want. Or something like that. Like, he's still, who knows? Brushing her hair back with one hand, and she watched him descend into the dark of the stairwell, and then she pulled the door shut behind her. It could be that he admitted to her that he's probably going to be murdered tonight. He stood at the edge of the dance floor. A ring of people had taken the floor and were holding hands and grinning and calling out to one another. A fiddler sat on a stool on the stage, and a man walked up and down, calling out the order of the dance and gesturing and stepping away in the way he wished them to go. So there's a man leading the dance, calling the tune. Then the fiddle is squealing. He goes outside because he has to go to the bathroom. The rain stopped and the air was cold. He stood in the yard. Stars were falling across the sky, myriad and random, speeding along brief vectors from their origins in night to their destinies in dust and nothingness. Within the hall, the fiddle squealed and the dancers shuffled and stomped. So it's in this chapter, I believe one of the points is the inevitability of death. How do you conduct your life in the face of the fact that it'll all come to nothing anyway? And then the luminosity of the stars in a brief point in their arc downward. So again, I think the evening redness in the west is ultimately kind of almost casual. It's like, look, we're going to be dead soon. What are you going to do with yourself before then? Are you really going to hold on to these stupid ideas? Are you really going to hold on to morality? Or are you just going to dance and kill? Are you not going to embrace your nature before it's all gone? And again, returning into dust, the idea that when Adam and Eve were cast out, it says, like, dust, you come from dust, you will go back to dust. You will till the field. And we see in the very beginning, there are people picking cotton. That might be something to do with it. Are you going to simply follow God's plan, or are you not going to embrace something that you had before you were cast out of the garden? Now it says, within the hall the fiddle squealed, the dancers shuffled and stomped. In the street, men were calling for the little girl whose bear was dead, for she was lost. They went among the darkened lots with lanterns and torches, calling out to her. They went to buy the bear's skin, which is funny. They went to buy the hide. This little girl is lost without the bear. So without this primordial creature, without this characterized, this grotesque thing that has been very pitifully shot, she has nothing now. I mean, the old man probably is going to abandon her, so she has been, once again, euchred out of fate through an act of violence. He went down to the walkboard toward the jakes. He stood outside listening to the voices fading away, and he looked again at the silent tracks of the stars where they died over the darkened hills. Then he opened the rough board door of the jakes and stepped in. The judge was seated upon the closet. He was naked, and he rose up smiling and gathered him in his arms against the immense and terrible flesh and shot the wooden bar latch home behind him. In the saloon, two men who wanted to buy the hide were looking for the owner of the bear. The bear lay on the stage in an immense pool of blood. All the candles had gone out, save the one, and it guttered uneasily within its grease like a votive lamp. In the dance hall, a young man had joined the fiddler, and he kept the measure of the music with a pair of spoons. The whores sashayed half naked, some with their breasts exposed. So again, losing all sense of civilization, propriety. A guy goes down to the jakes to take a piss. He says, "Is someone in there?" The man who was relieving himself already there did not look up. "I wouldn't go in there if I were you," he said. "Is there somebody in there?" The guy says again, "I wouldn't go in." He hitched himself up and buttoned his trousers and stepped past them and went up the walk towards the lights. The first man watched him go and then opened the door to the Jakes. He says, "Good God Almighty." So proclaiming the power of the Lord when he sees the kid. "What is it?" He didn't answer. He stepped past the other and went back up the walk. The other man stood looking after him. Then he opened the door and looked in. So it's like, I believe what happened really was, it's like the guy might have known that something bad was in there, but he wasn't even sure what it was. And the idea of it being a jake, like a portage or an outhouse, we see references to a tabernacle, to a which is like this tent, this religious kind of Christian or Jewish tent, where you'd go in and worship, and they could be assembled relatively easily. And it's almost like a mobile. It's almost like a revival might have a tabernacle, and it's as if the kid, then this murdered kid, is meant to be this icon. It's meant to be this example that who has been visited by some divine creature. And again, a tabernacle usually has something holy or important in it. And so this ritual, which obviously smacks of being very pagan, being very ancient, will have some kind of, it will transcend Christianity in a way. So what we have to remember at this point, and so they've rolled the dead bear into the wagon sheet, and there was a general call for hands in the anteroom. The tobacco smoke circled the lamps like an evil fog, and the men bid and dealt in a low mutter. So this bear is dead, and they're just kind of talking about, like, what are we going to do with the skin? So again, belief in the human spirit. The spirit is completely destroyed. There's nothing left of it. It's pure industry, and people are no longer in control of their own fates. What we have to remember here, that many people glance over, is that people have become aware of the boy's death, of the man's death, and they are now going back to the tavern to notify people of it. There was a lull in the dancing, and a second fiddler took the stage, and the two plucked their strings and turned the little hardwood pegs until they were satisfied. Many among the dancers were staggering drunk through the room, and someone had rid themselves of shirts and jackets and stood bare-chested and sweating, even though the room was cold enough to cloud their breath. An enormous whore, so again, it's like they're in hell. An enormous whore stood clapping her hands at the bandstand and calling drunkenly for the music. She wore nothing but a pair of men's drawers, and some of her sisters were likewise clad in what appeared to be trophies, hats or pantaloons or blue twill cavalry jackets, not dissimilar to the Comanches in the very beginning, who were clad in the kind of forfeited items of former soldiers, and now there are men taking their clothes off, stripping down to something. As the music sawed up, there was a lively cry from all, and a caller stood to the front and called out the dance, and the dancers stomped and hooted and lurched against one another, and they are dancing, the board floor slamming under the jackboots, and the fiddlers grinning hideously over their canted pieces. So it's a danse macabre, and it's a dance of death, if you will. There was a lively cry. I believe that it's someone who saw, like a woman who came out and saw the kid in the jakes and said, "Oh my good God," she screams, seeing it. And there seems to be this union of something that is unbelievably horrifying, and it's a call for sorrow and tragedy, and then this kind of mirror joy and celebration, and again, the grotesqueness, the atrocity of this joy in the face of things that are happening. Towering over them all is the judge, and he is naked, dancing, his small feet lively and quick, and now in double time, and bowing to the ladies, huge and pale and hairless, like an enormous infant. He never sleeps, he says he'll never die. He bows to the fiddlers and sashays backwards and throws his head back and laughs deeply in his throat. And he is a great favorite, the judge. He wafts his hat, and the lunar dome of his skull passes palely under the lamps, and he swings about and takes possession of one of the fiddles, and he pirouettes and makes a pass, 2 passes, dancing and fiddling at once. His feet are light and nimble. He never sleeps. He says that he will never die. He dances in light and in shadow, and he is a great favorite. He never sleeps. The judge, he is dancing, dancing. He says that he will never die. And that is the end of the book itself before the epilogue. Now, what are we to do about this? The first thing I'd like to say, to go back, with the buffalo hunters, the idea that people are being drawn into this industry of just wiping out the buffalo. And you can see that the kids who ask the protagonist, what outfit are you a part of? They themselves are kind of orphaned. I mean, they're teenagers. Why are they alone? And they say, oh, you must be part of this exterminating gang. The protagonist denies it, as if it's ridiculous. And so he kind of is trying to fight fate. He's trying to fight what he has been determined to be. This is something that the judge finds silly. I'm sorry. I had a lot of salami earlier. When he asks, when the judge asks, do you believe it's over, son? Will the world stop turning because someone died? To the contrary, the world will keep turning, in fact, because someone died. Death can be a cause for celebrating. And again, about the half-breed boy. Let's see what else. And again, with the kids that he meets, the kids are orphaned. They're kind of products of history. Elrod, unfortunately, is a very miserable one. His younger brother sees him as an example, Randall. Elrod wants to call out the man for being a fraud, for being a liar. And this is something, I believe, that might hurt the kid, the protagonist, I mean. Because he himself is he hated his father, he was guilty for what he had done, he could see through the judge. He is not, I think he's a sensitive person to lying, because the man himself is also agitated by it. When the boy, he sees the good in the kid. The kid wants to find truth. He is looking for truth in the world, but he is like the traveler's son. He is like from the harness maker story. In fact, we learn, almost like as a slap on the head, his granddaddy was killed by a lunatic and buried in the woods like a dog. So he's never known good fortune in his life, and now he ain't got a soul in this world. So this is like the son of the traveler's son. It's literally like his granddaddy was buried in the woods. Then which is the traveler, and the traveler's son was euchred out of his patrimony. He will never access truth in the world because he has never seen the folly of mankind in his own father. And then somehow the grandson, now Elrod, somehow believes in this myth of the harness maker, which, by the way, what I forgot to mention about the harness maker story is there is no way it can possibly be true. Nobody from that story could possibly report it to anyone. The traveler's son had no idea what was going on. His grandson would have less remote of a possibility. The widow would have no way of knowing. The wife of the harness maker didn't know. Only the son of the harness maker knew and learned about it and scattered the bones. But he became a serial killer. There's no way he was going around telling people this is what happened to me. Maybe at one point he confessed it, and that might have been the myth, but the fact that you've never heard of him, the fact that this is a myth, shows that nobody caught him, probably. And so nobody could have communicated that story to anyone. It is a complete fabrication, and yet you can see people are more interested in fabrications. They are more interested in fables than they are in real life. The man tries to assert to Elrod, like, look, this is the truth. And despite trying to advocate the truth, Elrod is like, no, I don't believe that. It's complete nonsense. So he would rather believe in a myth than something that he himself he believes is mythically untrue. And again, as the judge says, the past that was differs not at all from the past that was not, because people are more interested in the myth of things rather than the truth of it. Also a comment on the writing of Westerns for McCarthy. And again, the Dauphin, the thing about the Dauphin, Elrod was very proud and vain and naive, and it perpetuates the institution of violence. The man was defending himself because he was holding on to the truth. And I believe, if anything, what we are to take away from a study of violence in history is that the more rules you have, the more standards you have, the higher the standard to which you must ascend, the more likely it is to descend into violence. And ultimately, people cannot be held accountable for it. They're committing violence because they think that it's the right thing to do. Now, this was written in 1985. After this, we see numerous genocides in the 90s. Among them, that happened in my lifetime, would be the Rwandan genocide, in which these two groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis, were historically divided along completely arbitrary lines. It was a remnant of Belgian occupation that privileged or discriminated one group. And there were there was some fermenting at that time, but on the radio stations, it was telling people, look, they're getting ready. They're going to come kill every man, woman, and child. You need to get your machete. Everyone has a machete because you have to cut through the reeds. They take out their weapons and they kill the opposite side in an intensity like we've never seen before, 10,000 in a day, which is unprecedented. And it is because they were acting out of the good of their heart. This is very profound because they thought that they were defending themselves. It might have been the same in the Balkan Wars, in which people were literally going next door to kill people because they were religiously or ethnically, they believed in an antagonism, and it is the false antagonism. And so I don't think the judge would necessarily approve of something that, say, like Elrod was going to kill him because he thought he was lying, because Elrod is lost. But he's happy that he is trying his best, that he is doing it for a good reason. He needs to overcome this morality, overcome these little obsessions of his. No, you have to be lying, and embrace violence and death as a way of life. The kid seems to see that these things happen out of our control. This is something that the judge understands but seeks to exploit. He is exploiting the pain that people feel in the same way that you would exploit the pain that a bear feels and teach it to dance. Whereas the judge has an exploitative, a justifying attitude in everything he does. And that's the difference. The judge justifies everything. He practically embodies the name. Justice and judicus are very similar. Do they have the same root? I don't think so. And so the man, at this point, the man gets in an argument with Elrod. Elrod comes with a rifle. The man cannot forgive him. The man cannot say, okay, well, it sounds silly, but because the man is afraid for his life. If he forgave him and said, look, I understand how you feel, go do what you have to do, it would kill the man. So he has to defend himself. He has to commit an act of violence to preserve himself. We can see the environment corrupting the human soul. The kid realizes that in this desert, in this vacuum of morality, in which you are forced to do things you don't want to do, you need to remember that it's not your fault. And so the kid absolves everyone in a way. He responds to the judge in a very dismissive way because he realizes the judge is teeming with shit. It is complete nonsense what he is saying. The judge looks at what has already happened. He looks at what always happens in history and says, this is the way it's got to be. He uses excuses. He frames information that is not new to you in a way that makes you commit these acts. I believe he coaxed the men at the table into possibly shooting the bear. After the boy's death, we discover that the boy was a victim of life, lost all of his family, and so he is being naturalized to this landscape of naked brutality. He will never see the point of forgiveness in the same way that if you saw, like the judge telling the harness maker story said, if you saw your dad acting like an idiot or messing up, you'll forgive him and say, okay, well, that's how it is. And you can move past it. You can become a more complete person by identifying that there are things that are not right. There are things that are not equitable. And so the judge can ascend to this point, I think, because he has found, or he believes there is no morality. We are meant to follow this path to this ultimate conclusion, and that the conclusion rules death or finality or the vetting, the crucible of war. And I believe war itself is just it serves his purpose without being the center of his purpose, because we see so much more in this book. A lot of videos seem to take him wholesale and say, yes, this is what the judge is saying. This is justifying a war. I don't think that that is the ultimate centerfold. I think it's simply there to prove his point. And now look, as soon as you change the context for the judge, he's not talking about war anymore. He says it's been dishonored, and you preserve war, preserve the institution of violence by letting blood. So it could be the dance. The dance could be synonymous with war. And the war itself is never explicit war, but an antagonism, proving oneself through antagonism, which is what Elrod tried to do. Elrod was deprived of everything. He has nothing. He has to distinguish himself. And it would be irrational. It would be insane in his context to simply let things go. He is like a bear in the wild who doesn't know what he's doing, lashing out for no particular reason. Pity is pathetic in such a context. The kids who bothered the man were likewise dumb animals, like the kid will describe, but we're going to come back to this concept. These dumb animals were merely products of their experiences and little more, leaves in the wind. And to supersede one's origins is the ultimate goal in this book. All of the people, bears and all, are merely just kind of lashed to this beast of life, and their deaths are like a liberation from this. You don't feel bad for someone until they're victimized. Why are we to revile the judge simply because he's not a victim like us? There must be more to life than just feeling bad for things and people in history. So dancing is one way of working through the sense of anomie or helplessness, and it is the triumph of joy. And so these people, like the hatless man who feels like he has been crushed by life, that there is nothing left for him, the judge is like a priest who comes and says, look, there is something for you. It's violence. It's proving oneself. This has happened to you. You can go ahead and do it to someone else. And you can dance. You can ignore the pain. You can ignore the tragedy of life in a fetishistic way, not in a healthful way at all. Why are we to revile him for not being a victim like us? There must be more to life. Blah, blah, blah. The triumph of joy. Who in their right mind would find joy in such a context? They murdered an animal. What is the relationship between happiness and death? The judge contends that a ceremony without blood is no ritual at all, and a mock ritual, as if death is required to have a good time. And again, the kid says, I don't like craziness. The judge says, nor I. So it's as if he recognizes the truth of the matter, but acts anyway. And again, the idea that the hatless man is stuck in this architecture that he did not devise. It's true. He's inhabiting a body, a life that he did not want. What is the salvation from this? I think the kid has a very different connotation, a very different plan than the judge in this book. And then the judge says, what man would not be a dancer if he could? So we are to take all this pain. We are to take all this privation. We are to take all of these tragedies in this unlivable world, and we are to commute them to dancing. We're expressing ourselves. And it's this expression that is synonymous with killing, as if killing is an expression. It is a confirmation of ourselves by answering to, or by letting out what we have been through, as if death gave us this fate, and so we will continue to perpetuate death as a release, a pressure valve, which will, as we have seen throughout this book, perpetuate the institution of violence, the machine of violence that the hermit at the very beginning warned us about, that something could perpetuate evil 1,000 years. And it seems like the hermit understood everything in this book very clearly. And the kids seemed to just look at him like he was crazy. And now I bet he's looking back at him like, God, that guy was right. But even the hermit couldn't had to admit that he himself was corrupted. He tried to, I think he was looking at the kid while he was sleeping, or trying to do something to the kid while he was sleeping. And it's as if he couldn't believe that the kid would even be preserved in such an environment. It's almost as if he's amazed to see another person in his presence. And again, the idea that, the judge dispels in the tavern the idea that we're not friends. He would hold that we're all friends, actually. And that the antagonisms are arbitrary. And that this antagonism should be kind of against life itself, which is what the dancing would be. You're dancing against all this crap you have to go through. It never makes any sense. I mean, you're just supposed to say, oh, God, F it, I'm just going to go dance. In the same way you'd say F it and you'd shoot someone. And it's like, who would not become a dancer if they could? It's a natural thing to do, and it's the way that people should do it. Like with the hatless man, he can't be contained in this architecture. He can't live in the house he was born in. This is something the kid realized right away. He left. He became a whole new person. This is what the judge wanted him to do, and he wanted him to follow this life of mindless violence just for the sake of it, to destroy the walls that are containing us, which is what the judge would like to do. He who builds in stone, you know. But again, there is the nobility of destroying what has been created in a way of freeing people. And this is not a freedom that the kid would like to entertain. It is a terrifying freedom. The triumph of the will, the triumph of the human spirit is terrifying. That's what we are to take away from Blood Meridian. A man seeks his own destiny and no other, will or nil. That's it. It's either you will yourself through all of this, or you become a clown. You become a caricature. You become a doormat. You become an instrument of something stupid. The judge loves this idiot that he finds who eats his own shit, and his brother, the brother of the idiot, sells him for a song, and the judge takes the idiot around on a leash as if he would like to have this thing that is a dumb animal. And like when it comes to the idea of victimhood, that you pity somewhere, it's like the bear at the very beginning that lunged at them, which is also this kind of stupid creature, is an enemy because it attacked them, and it's a wild thing, and you don't feel bad for killing it. It deserved it. But the bear at the end, that was dressed in a skirt and dancing and was trying to do its best, was a victim. And so our sorrow for the death of the bear only makes sense because the bear lived as a slave. So had the bear been wild and free, there would be no need for sorrow. Humans are, in reality, wild animals. The morality of the judge, one of the strongest challenges to theodicy, and this, I believe this is a wonderful criticism of theodicy, and we will conclusively destroy the doctrine of cynical theodicy that takes it seriously before the end of this video. One thing about theodicy that the judge would argue is, okay, why does God allow these things to happen? Because in fact, we are to return to our native state, being like Adam and Eve, eating the fruit anyway, killing the snake, be ourselves, distinguish ourselves. We do not exist in a moral framework. The framework itself has only been invented as a kind of a false refuge, which even a Christian would attend to. Society is this almost necessary evil because we can't work our crap out. Eve was made to be subordinate to Adam, and this, this kind of inversion of order because she ate the fruit, and so Adam is there to till the field. He comes from dust, and to dust he will return. And that's kind of every man thereafter is an Adam, every woman thereafter is an Eve, there to sorrow. The man is to till. And this is not something that the judge thinks people should be doing. He thinks they should be more basic, that they should be free, if you would. You don't feel bad for the bear in the beginning because it was eating something and defending itself. And it's crazy, it's wild. You don't feel bad. This act of hunting it, this act of going after it is almost something you should do. This is one of the many pathways into the mind for violence. This is something that should happen. And the only reason you feel bad for people is because they're being victimized. If they took the initiative, if they assumed the will, you wouldn't feel bad for them. They'd be in a state of competition. And so, the kid is made to feel guilty because he was using whores at one point. He was crowned. He was taking advantage of these people's willingness to give way to him. And he has now changed his mind. And this kind of hypocrisy is what the judge is calling out. And so the real evil here seems to be society and morals themselves. Why would you give people this idea that will disappoint them? And I believe the judge is disappointed because the kid ultimately goes back to society and says, look, I shouldn't keep doing this and people shouldn't do this, which the judge would argue against. This society is just clothes that can't contain us. The human spirit would like to jump out. It would like to rush out, and it would like to expand. It would like to embrace everything. And for some reason, the kid shies away from this because it is too terrifying. He finds it antithetical to human life. At the end of the book, we see all the people taking their clothes off. Women are wearing men's drawers. They're stealing their clothes. The men are naked. They're dancing in a circle. And the judge is playing a fiddle, the degeneracy of mankind. And there's only one candle left in the entire thing. Now, we'll go back to the death of the kid. Let's see, anything else I got to go through? Not really. Now, the kid's death is not meant to be knowable. I mean, McCarthy would have told us what we're looking at. He has vividly described the way people have died in this book. It stands in contrast, but is a perfect synonym to a painting called Dead Christ by Hans Holbein, which was the point of the novel The Idiot by Dostoevsky. So as you will continue to hear from me forever, there is an almost inseparable relationship between the philosophy of Dostoevsky and the philosophy of Cormac McCarthy. In Dead Christ, and you can Google it right now, I recommend you do, it's just a very long painting, and it just shows Jesus dead. You just see the wounds. It's not grotesque. It's not overdone. There's nothing Baroque about it. There's nothing even decorous about it. It's just a pale corpse. His expression is completely just, animal, just literally eyes rolling back. You see the iconic wounds. You see this pure emaciation, clearly as if Hans Holbein has seen someone in that state. And it's meant to show, look at what mankind has done to Jesus. Look at what he has done. And look at what we have done. And Dostoevsky, upon seeing this painting, and he later says this through the mouth of Hippolyte in the book, he says, a man could lose his faith by looking at this painting, by saying, there's no way we allowed ourselves to do this to the Son of God. We can never forgive ourselves. And so, how do you forgive yourself? For committing these atrocious acts, for being led so far astray. The way is that Christ has already forgiven you. Now, you are to look at the corpse and consider the plight of the Messiah. The suffering of the Messiah in this context is brutally realistic, unforgivingly plain and distinct. There are no fireworks in Dead Christ. He was tortured and starved to death for days. The kid's suffering is similar. The point is not the physical suffering, no matter how brutal it is. His suffering, the kid's suffering, is for the world, and his suffering for the world exceeds this by countless multiples. His suffering is for people. His suffering is for the act, the spiritual life of mankind. When you see that a woman or children are being slaughtered, it is this for which he is suffering. The kid has taken all the sins that he has witnessed in his heart, and he has forgiven mankind through a very simple retort to the judge. Even a dumb animal can dance. He sees that the bear on the stage has been tortured into this state. The bear continues dancing after he is shot. The bear believes he is doing the right thing. The kid forgives people. He forgives the judge for these acts of violence because they don't know better. Even a dumb animal can dance. He forgives mankind for its animal stupidity, its gullibility. So this is why I don't think the kid was corrupted by the end. He maintained himself. He maintained what he believes is right. He has forgiven everyone. And he does this because violence to him is something that he doesn't feel he needs to commit. He almost organically gets through it. He forgives humans for their gullibility. Satan, the judge, I believe, hates the kid for embodying this persistent and this nameless faith that's not even necessarily Christian, despite being illiterate and unlearned. He despises anyone who is simply human and humane without qualification. He wants that argument. He wants to break it down. He wants everyone to bow their head and be ashamed of their pointless existence sanctioned out of warfare that they are going to, take up again. He wants everyone to make gunpowder and fight. But the kid lives life pious to the natural world, the child, the father of the man, like in the Wordsworth poem that the first page quotes. It is the judge who has been defined by reason and urgency, by systemic knowledge, rational logic. And the lamb, the kid, bears all of mankind's sins in one heart, will pass over the altar in this chapter. The kid has taken all the sins of mankind. He has seen them all, and he has seen everything that could possibly happen, almost like in the Garden of Gethsemane. He has seen people enslaved. He has seen people massacred. He has literally participated. And he still says, that's what it is. It is what it is, man. He didn't want to kill Elrod. He doesn't think it's inevitable. And the manner in which it is done is irrelevant, how he's killed. We are to project our own interpretations. We are to think that his throat was slit like a lamb, that he was scalped like the Indians, that he was contorted or bled and disemboweled. The point is not the literal act of killing him. He was killed by everything he has experienced and the beliefs that he harbored nonetheless. And he was vetted at the tavern. When an author hands you a gap or a blank, that's a cue to provide, to fill it in. All possible suffering is visited on him at the moment that he is killed. That's all we are to take away. All possible suffering. The judge then goes forth naked before mankind, holding their audience, a great favorite, and they are lambs to the slaughter. They buy him wholesale. They love him. His immortality merely comments on the immortality of man's weak will. He will always succeed because humans will allow him to. Their suffering, their expression, they feel bad for him, and they pile their feelings, they pile their hatred, their doubts upon him, and he actualizes them. He gives them a refuge from it. They are sacrificing, surrendering their will to him. A human must decide on their own against all possible temptations or even facts of life. Nothing should dominate the will, as the kid realizes, no matter how horrifying or alluring or seemingly logical it might be. The heart must not become another kind of clay. And in the very end, we see the judge molding everyone to his will effortlessly. It is this expression of will in the face of a seemingly very pessimistic world that people are drawn to, like moths to a candle. And there's only one candle in the tavern at the very end. It's like they are these insects ripping off their clothes and kind of gravitating around them. And they don't realize, like, we're going to kill ourselves doing this. And so the degeneracy of mankind has nothing to do with natural processes. It is simply the failure of the will. It is the failure of our ability to find meaning or find redemption in the natural world without a God supervising us. And the judge takes advantage of this. Again, he is simply here to represent history to humanity. And he does a poor job of it. He simply creates reasons for degeneracy, as if we're all going to arrive at this point anyway. Further, the judge does not want to be loved. He does not want to be forgiven. He wants to be loved in a kind of fetishistic manner, an objective manner. And were he forgiven, then it would immediately connote that he had been evil, or that he is being neutered. His will is being culled. He's becoming subject to a belief system. His lust for being loved is not to be troubled by moral determinations. And again, he is preying on people's weak wills. He has to triumph. He has to take control of this. His lust for being loved is not to be troubled. He refuses to bow to any existing system of ethics. But the kid has taken his fellow man into his heart, like from chapter 11, and he has, in fact, found himself in a desert place. The presence of the judge in the kid's life exposes the truth of this very Bema-esque kind of animal sorrow that exacts suffering on others. It allows the kid to expunge this poisonous sorrow from himself organically, not arbitrarily, so that in fact we see a perfect Bildungsroman in the kid. He has grown not only by seeing, but by participating in sin, the perfect arc of coming into moral wisdom, which he now has. Because he now harnesses knowledge that might redeem mankind, the judge slaughters him like you would slaughter a lamb. It is the snuffing, the oppression of the Messiah. And every individual could be a Messiah, but they are being co-opted. They are being sabotaged by Satan, in the same way that we now revere Christ for being suppressed by the Romans. Their final conversation at the bar has written the kid's epitaph. It was his last chance. He refused, and stood by his perseverance in man's favor. The kid, in this sense, cannot be construed as messianic. He has made himself messianic in this sense. And it is the small and effortless act of being Christian or being pious, just forgiving everyone, not buying into these patterns of behavior that seem forced on us. I believe it is an active element in the narrative, not just a projection. I don't feel like I'm just projecting. I think it's a part of it. Like Freemasonry might be part of the book. Gnosticism, it definitely has that blueprint. But there are even people who find Blood Meridian to be a parable towards like animal rights and veganism, which, by the way, if you want to take it like that, it is probably the best ever. But the kid has stood against the judge who judges. The kid does not judge. This is the most basic rhetorical point I can use to prove my interpretation. There's a guy named the judge, and the kid doesn't do what he wants. I throw my hands up. This is his error. He does not judge. He reserves. His reservation would definitely assign the sins that he has witnessed to his own heart, refusing to bear witness against his fellow man. He refuses to pour his heart into the common, as the judge says he wanted him to do when he visited him in jail. He loves the world and cannot be prevented in this attitude. This is his error in the eyes of pure evil. So yes, everything in this world wants you to get in a fight at the bank. You got disrespected, you want to punch someone in the face. You think people did something to your people, you have to go out and kill them. The judge says, this is life, man. This is what we do. Why would you not dance? The kid says, you don't need to do this. You don't need to do any of this. It's fine. If you simply take other people into your heart, it'll be no big deal. The kid would like to redeem mankind in this way. The judge would like to exploit it. And this way, the judge is a representation of Satan. The second question would concern whether or not the judge planned on having the kid act as a Messiah, whether he's doing this all on purpose. This disappointment was actually on purpose. It may be that violence creates messiahs, and the act of sorrowing, crying about the bear, for example, is equally as important as the act of killing. The death of the traveler causes a lot of sorrow for the harness maker's wife, and it defines the life of his fatherless son. So therefore, the thread of history follows this dualistic kind of parallel of realities of those who live in victimhood and those who are predacious or perpetuating victimhood, perpetrating against mankind. And this is a required duality. There must be killers and there must be killed because we need something to cry about. There must be those who are orphaned through acts of deception and murder. There must be evil people who permit mankind to learn through redemption. There must be examples of evil so that we might be saved. This is what I mean. This is the ultimate and conclusive argument against the cynical theodicy, the idea that yes, God has allowed all this to happen, therefore he is evil. Suffering and negation exist in order to provide a moral framework for us. We need to learn from the horror, from the terror that exists in the world. This is also why I'm not a militant atheist anymore. I'll never be Christian. I think it's just silly. But the idea that, we shouldn't worship God because he allows children to die in the womb. There shouldn't be a God because he allows children to be eaten by wolves. He has allowed all these things to happen, so we shouldn't worship him. These things exist in order to give us knowledge, in order to give us wisdom. It befalls a human being to acknowledge this in order to learn from the world, or else they will simply proceed as dumb animals and will continue to be defined and controlled by the natural world. There is something in Christian faith above the natural world, above the mundane, to which we can aspire. It is grace, or it is mercy, which the judge would like to sanction people out of. He would like to destroy the idea of mercy or forgiveness in the human heart, which would, in mercy, forgiveness, would create a strong heart, not another kind of clay. The natural piety of the kid is testament to his simplicity, his saint-like simplicity, his clarity on all matters. The kid masters the universe by forgiving it. no matter how terrifying or horrible it might be. Dostoevsky commented that an image like The Dead Christ by Hans Holbein would destroy one's faith. It is so graphic. Likewise, love of this kind could eclipse the flames of hell. That would decidedly put the judge out of a job. To forgive mankind for being so horrible, it would be the greatest gift of all time. The judge would like to suppress, quietly snuff out the idea of Christianity, the idea of redemption from the heart of man. He would like to allow people to go forward believing they are evil, believing the evil framework is the only one that could possibly exist. It is the industry, it is the efficaciousness of Satan. Because the way that the kid advocates is too quiet, it is too soft, it is basic, it is primordial. Forgiveness. The judge would like people to be more like stupid animals, simply responding to the prod, responding to the whip, like the bear dancing, And so I don't think that the judge is necessarily civilization. I think that's he plays that role. The bear in the dress is almost like a natural progression from the bear that dragged away the Delaware in chapter 11. The judge would like animals to react in an irrational way to irrational input. Like the random violence and loss that we face, the judge would like us to bottleneck this into atrocity, evil, violence, expression, the dance, if you would. And so this is not to say that the bear became a dancing figure because they did something wrong. They ended up that way because they did everything that they believed was right. The bear is saying, I'm sorry, I will dance harder now because I've been shot. That is how morality, that is how belief in good can be corrupted and how it can be turned into a caricature. The people who are dancing in the tavern at the end, they have been through so much. They have been through loss, suffering, hatred. They have been euchred out of their fate. They think, I've never done anything to hurt anyone. I didn't deserve any of this. I'm worth a lot more than this. They're going to try to fight against life, fight against fate in their own way. But they don't understand. They're simply playing along. And the judge realizes this. He realizes, here's the keyboard. I'm going to play people. The kid, almost like with the whore at the end, would say, it's okay. I understand. I can't do it right now, maybe. He couldn't get it up, possibly. But you shouldn't have to go through with this. I believe that was meant to show that he actually paid the whore without actually doing it. Saying, I'm going to give you this. It's fine. And she watched him go down the stairs as if she was thankful for him. He is forgiving mankind for what it has done to force her into this position. And the whores, the idea of this whores everywhere in this chapter. As if the little girl who has lost the bear, who has lost this last kind of, preservation of good, this last refuge, is going to be corrupted by the world now, simply because nobody believes there's any redemption in it, which the judge would like to dispel. The kid understands it's not your fault. It was not his fault that he killed his mother in childbirth. And he would advocate this, but he died. And so we are to look at the story as like the life of a saint, if you would. McCarthy was Irish Catholic. And I don't think people realize when you were raised a Catholic in the 20th century and before, 20th century at the latest, you know everything. Catholics, for some reason, have a much better knowledge about the Bible than anyone else. And especially because it's so baked into the sacraments. Like everything you do there, you take the wafer, the way you do prayers, everything. You have to learn the catechisms, I don't know if Irish Catholicism is vastly different. I just haven't found that out. But he always reminds me, and especially Blood Meridian in particular, and Outer Dark, Child of God, all the original Faulknerian era novels of McCarthy are, I think, akin to a story by Flannery O'Connor called A Good Man is Hard to Find, in which a family happens upon an outlaw who is on the run for murdering someone. And it's a conversation about whether someone will accept grace into their heart or not. When they discover something, that they are actually kin to one another, will we accept grace? Or will we be horrified by the idea of grace, as someone in that story is? And I believe you should read that, absolutely. If you like McCarthy, if you like Southern style authors, then Flannery O'Connor should be a no-brainer. A lot of N-words in that one, so be careful. Good Man to Hard to Find. I don't think that has an N-word in it. Most of her stories have the N-word. I think I have one of her. Yeah, I have one of her anthologies here, and you'll never find that at universities these days. But Good Man is hard to find. I don't think that has the N-word. The Life You Save May Be Your Own, also very McCarthyian in a way. Also, I don't think it has the N-word. Both very funny stories. And so the idea of Catholicism is like, there is this very basic relationship. Okay, we have the Trinity. We have all these old institutions of Christianity before the Protestant ethic that stripped a lot of them away, that transformed it, But having this basic Catholicism opens the Christian conversation up to something that is more historical. We see univocity, the one voice happening here, which is a Thomist idea, Thomas Aquinas, who said, we cannot describe God because we only have the stuff of the real world. You cannot describe God based on what we know. Therefore, there's no way of knowing him. I mean, it's also kind of shooting himself in the foot. There's no way you can understand God. But he's there through revelation. I'm losing it here. I need my fourth cup of coffee. You can find God only through revelation, through kind of finding him in things, if you would, which is also kind of what the judge says, but in a different way. And so I think what we see here is definitely a kind of almost Catholic or basic Christian conversation in Blood Meridian. It is a conversation about theodicy. Why is mankind degenerating? Why are bad things allowed to happen? The first answer would be because there is a vacuum of goodwill. And then there are questions like, well, if God designed it to be this way, then we should participate in it? Possibly. How do we know that the word of the Bible is meant to be taken seriously? These are other questions. You can see, however, here that the existence of Christ, the existence of someone who is willing to take the sins of mankind and be responsible, is a form of revelation, is a form of active, mortal, flesh and blood redemption, to spread the idea of forgiveness, spread the idea of grace through belief. And this is why I think ultimately the question of theodicy is won by Christianity, and why I'm not one of these fedora atheists. I think Christianity is just silly, so I won't believe it. But I mean, like, if there is a God, dude, you really want me to go to Sunday every single week? Like, I'm not going to sing the songs, dude. I read your book. Don't kill me. If you want me to do anything else, man. And then also, like, the idea that, okay, well, we need this moral standard there. We need these bad things to happen. We need to see these terrible things happening. Like, as soon as the half-breed boy is dead in chapter 9, the guys sitting there saying, man, he was great for this reason. He was great for that reason. Learning from tragedy. And that's almost what people do. I mean, they're learning. You're becoming better by seeing these terrible things happening. And so the judge does have a little bit of currency. It's almost like you shouldn't kill him. And like I've said before, what's going to happen if you kill the judge? Like, the kid has had a chance. Toadvine had a chance. Is that going to change anything? Not really. Everything will be the same. People will still be dumb animals. They will still continue to make these bad decisions. They will still continue to, in a way, euchre themselves and euchre others out of patrimony. The way that you differentiate yourself, you free yourself from this prison, is you understand it's nobody's fault. It's really nobody's fault. People make bad decisions. You have to forgive people for being these dumb animals who dance. The judge says, absolutely, you're darn right, animals can dance, and I'm going to make them dance. I'm going to exploit their condition rather than help get them out of it. This is the quiet and the very effective nature of Christianity. In fact, Outer Dark, which is somewhere, is the story of Cain and Abel. Cain, after killing his brother, was meant to wander forever. He would never be killed. He was protected, which is kind of what the three guys on the horseback are. They're making sure that he is protected, that there's nobody stopping him from wandering the world and contemplating what he has done, which may seem like like, okay, great, cool, I have no repercussions. But all throughout the book, Kulla, who exposed the infant, this is in the very beginning, it's not spoilers, who exposed his infant incestuous son, he is bombarded by questions, by these images, these ideas that remind him of what he has done. He's at the house of a lawyer. The lawyer asks him, do you have any kin? Kulla denies this, despite the fact that, yes, his sister Rinthi, he is chasing her. He denies this, and then he's immediately served a plate of steaming eggs, as if to emphasize what he has done. And so it's as if to say that no matter what you believe in theodicy, evil is actually correct, blah, 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 you will continue to suffer. And it is a false refuge. The actual refuge is forgiving yourself for what has happened, understanding what has happened, taking responsibility is the refuge. That is not something the judge would like you to know. He would like you to continue down this path into what will end up being slavery, what will end up being an inversion of human nature, dancing to the music. It is just, And again, people end up in this situation. People end up dancing not because they've done something wrong, it's because they've followed through on being human. If you are whipping someone, if you are torturing this animal and saying you are going to dance, the animal will be good. The animal will say, okay, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do a good job. This is for what the kid, I believe, is sorrowing. It is the pain that he feels experiencing these things throughout the book, despite participating in them. Maybe at one time he was unfeeling towards others because he felt that he himself has suffered so terribly. But once again, as Dostoevsky holds in The Brothers Karamazov, the suffering of one person is the suffering of all mankind. And this is the friendship of man, the fellowship of man. Dostoevsky had some strangely 1960s vibes to what he believed. He believed there should be this world commune of, not in a communist sense, but almost like a theocracy, above theocracy. Because he prioritized the human spirit above everything else. And he believes that the spirit must be preserved against everything that happens, no matter what. The character of Alyosha Karamazov, or Alexei Karamazov, is known for being infinitely forgiving. Everyone loves him as soon as they even talk to him once. Everyone loves Alyosha. They find a refuge in him because he is infinitely forgiving. Even his eldest brother, who is violent, who curses people, can be considered, you can forgive him because even his elder brother realizes, I'm doing the best that I can. He follows through on things he feels are right. It is the middle brother, Ivan, who justifies these things, justifies his mesotheism, his hatred of God, because of the horror that God has put on the world, the terror. Dostoevsky's answer to this is that you must accept that everyone suffers. It is not merely I who suffers. And so that there is no basis for commuting the justice or transposing the suffering onto other people. There's no reason to do that. Because the reason you were hurt is nobody's fault. It's very hard to come to this conclusion in light of someone like Fyodor Pavlovich, their father, who is just disgusting and evil. Even he realizes that he is disgusting, that he is grotesque. Even he has a better chance of being redeemed than Ivan, who creates a system of logic because he believes that God is not to be worshipped. In fact, he is to be hated because of what he has done. Of course, Dostoevsky would say, well, God is perfect, so there's no way that he wanted people to hate him. But rather, you go to see through the Brothers Karamazov that Ivan's seemingly innocent and seemingly trivial cynicism actually ends up having much more catastrophic effects on everyone in the book than the people who are even doing overtly bad things. And so ultimately the answer is redemption. The answer is forgiveness. The kid is called the kid, I think, for a very specific reason. He's meant to be like a lamb, and he is the lamb. I believe the judge sees that he represents this. He is innocent. He is like a child, and he is, in fact, a teenager at this time, for most of the novel. By the end, the judge is disappointed that he has not essentially become some kind of savage or maybe died for what he believed or something like that. He's angry that the kid has learned forgiveness, which the judge would say is a false doctrine. Words, books lie, as he says, but the kid didn't even read the book. He was illiterate. He carried a Bible that he couldn't read, and so he can access the truth without going through the qualification to do it. He can supersede society, supersede civilization, supersede religion to access his faith. And many people would equate Blood Meridian to Nietzsche's, again, like the boy becoming the man, in reference to the will to power. I believe that's what it is. McCarthy here, I think, is offering a very astute and a very revolutionary twist, that the overman, the Ubermensch, like the judge, is not really what we should be moving towards. And he really is an Ubermensch. I mean, I think he is a Nietzschean character. The answer is to be like the man, the kid. You're not to take these things seriously. The world is an environment that inspires nightmares. You are not to take it seriously. You are to forgive it for what it does, because it can't, it's not its fault. It is the nature. It is a dumb animal. And so this little line here, even a dumb animal can dance, is very profound. I don't think it's just meant to be, oh, well, I don't think it's just meant to be a part of the conversation. It is a forgiving. It is the redemption of the human race for what it's going to do. And the dancing is not even meant to be like a crime or anything. It's just this false, this evil pattern of thought that I'm going to express myself. I'm going to move my suffering along to someone else. The perpetuation of the institution of violence. It's just a processing, if you would. And then, of course, at the end, we have the epilogue. In the dawn, there is a man progressing over the plain by means of holes which he is making in the ground. He uses an implement with 2 handles, and he chucks it into the hole, and he enkindles the stone in the hole with his steel, hole by hole, striking the fire out of the rock which God has put there. On the plain behind him are the wanderers in search of bones and those who do not search, and they move haltingly in the light, like mechanisms whose movements are monitored with escapement and palate, so that they appear restrained by a prudence or reflectiveness which has no inner reality, and they cross in their progress one by one that track of holes that runs to the rim of the visible ground, in which seems less the pursuit of some continuance than the verification of a principle, a validation of sequence and causality, as if each round and perfect hole owed its existence to the one before it, there on that prairie upon which are the bones and the gatherers of bones, and those who do not gather. He strikes fire in the hole and draws out his steel. Then they all move on again. So we are slowly progressing over this landscape, looking for truth, finding the fire in the earth that God put there. There's a man striking ahead of them, and they gather around to essentially look at it like automatons or something. And then they kind of move and stop, move and stop. And it's kind of a bit like Manifest Destiny, kind of a bit like just traversing the world. It is looking for truth, even though the truth is implicit in your very being. There is no history, again, like I'll say. There is the present moment and the way things are done. The past and the future are a figment, in a way. And the truth is evident in everything that you do. The truth can be accessed in the way that you approach every issue. And so I think that is why the judge would say, well, people go to war because it's kind of what people have always done. It's kind of God, if you would. Equating war to God, I think with reference to the epilogue, is like people are trying to understand things by slicing into things, by breaking things open, like he says, like an egg, and that it contains all good things in it. Just like how killing someone, slicing them through, or scalping them, would somehow teach you more about yourself. I think that's what people are doing. They're looking for a truth, but it's evident regardless. And the light that God put there, the God is speaking to us again through things that you can find in the real world. But ultimately, like the judge says, you will end up at the same conclusion anyway. And he thinks it's silly that people will try to entertain morals, ideas, restraint in such an environment. So generally, that's about everything I can say about chapter 23. I don't think that it is particularly cryptic. I don't think it's particularly enigmatic in a way. I think it's actually kind of straightforward. And I think it's meant to be kind of like a dud, like I've said. Like the kid's death is not meant to be knowable. I think you're supposed to put forward your own ideas and it's kind of like the Dead Christ. And it's like the opposite of the Dead Christ painting, because Dead Christ, who are looking at Jesus dead. With the kid, you cannot see him. But it's the same practice. You're doing the same thing, which is reflecting on everything that the kid was, reflecting on why he ended up there. The same with the image of Christ. You're reflecting on his role in all of this, and how we are to consider him. And you're supposed to look at the kid dead in the jakes with pity. And people are alarmed. And I believe there is meant to be the idea that there's a cry, there's a scream during the dance that is meant to evoke, like, oh, everyone needs to look at this, something just happened. But really, it just gets people to dance even more, just like the bear being shot gets it to dance even harder. And I think, really, if you put a gun to my head, I'd say McCarthy doesn't have that much to say, because he says it very concisely. He says it very in a small amount of words. Like, this is meant to be an epic, but it's not that long. It's about 352 in this edition. 353, I mean, because there's one more after that. So 350 pages for an epic novel is pretty brief. No edition of the Iliad is that short. It's a poem too, so But Books of Jacob I have somewhere around here. It's pretty huge. But it's a lot in a short amount. But ultimately, I think McCarthy's message is pretty, I wouldn't say standard, but it is pretty, he's working within a very accessible canon of knowledge, Christian thought, theology, conversations that you have access to. He read a lot of Oswald Spengler. A lot of people were confused in my original video. Why do I go into Oswald Spengler and Schopenhauer? That's who McCarthy read. That's what he admits to reading. The will to power. The judge himself says in this chapter, it's either will or nil. It's either you express the will or you simply fade into nothingness, as the kid observes the stars doing right before he's killed. And yet this fading, and many people look at it on the surface level, oh, it means you need to commit acts of violence, you need to express yourself, and that's pretty much it. That might be it. That might be all McCarthy's saying. But what we do see is a conversation that is proceeding to qualify these statements and qualify these ideas. So really, the statement, what we take away at the end, I think is very simple. But going through it and finding why it's true, I think is the real gift of the book. So you can read it and come away with a very accurate reading with little knowledge or little research. The more research you do, you simply, I think, come to more interesting ways of exploring it. That's why there's a lot of videos out there that they do a good job. They explore everything. There's one that really emphasized the Garden of Eden that I wasn't satisfied with. It's one of those like really standard, ultra edited videos. I think it's true, but you get to a point where you're just kind of going off on your own Wikipedia adventure. I've tried to keep this pretty faithful to what McCarthy is writing in the book, using rhetorical ideas. Like, for example, the judge is called the judge, he judges. The kid is the opposite, he does not judge. This connotes that he is taking things onto himself. He's taking responsibility, putting himself aside for others. He is taken by the hand by this dwarf prostitute, I think, whom he pities. And I don't think it might be that they don't do it. I think they do. But I think it would make more sense if he, I said that really weirdly, I think they do. I just think it's just because everyone else thinks they don't. But it would make sense if he just kind of gave her money and said, look, just take it. You don't have to do it. And she's also like watching him go down the hall as if like she's thanking him. Like, why did he do that for me? And she stays in the room as if she has to make it look like something happened to her and she can't go back down and join everyone. McCarthy calls that moment like a refuge for them both from what is going on, as if they can't say what they're doing. And of course, you wouldn't tell that to your pimp, And you wouldn't tell your pimp, like, yeah, I'm just, this guy paid me to do nothing. He'd be like, well, get back out there. And, So I think that's why she says, I gotta go. It's because she doesn't want to go report to the pimp, like, hey, I got nothing to do. I think generally, and McCarthy has said, everything's on the page. There's almost nothing to explore. And I think it ends up being kind of true. So what I've done here is really just wanted to rein it all back into a way of looking at the book that is more accessible, that makes a bit more, it's a bit more pragmatic or makes some more practical sense instead of going out and quoting, oh, in Ezekiel 28, addressing the foreign nations, it's blah, 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 or Satan descending to the earth, you know. It can help. If you read Milton, it'll prepare you for this book. If you read Moby Dick, it will prepare you for this book, absolutely. You should read the book of Job, which doesn't take long. That would be a precursor. But ultimately, hopefully, a video like this or looking at research will help you come to the conclusions anyway. And honestly, I'd be pretty impressed if you just read Moby Dick, read Blood Meridian, and said, okay, here's how they go together. Like, I'm sure, if you're very literary, great, but you must have had a background to do that. You must be able to understand Moby Dick well with that kind of experience in order to apply it to a book like this. I spend time researching this stuff. I don't pretend like I know things that people don't know. I'm generally just telling you what I've looked up and what seems to make sense in a textual, in a contextual kind of situation. So I don't think these videos are meant to be like, here's the ultimate meaning, here's what it is. I think we do a lot of good work in these videos, but ultimately, there's other great videos that come out. There's this guy named Wendigoon, I found out, who just put out, like literally 3 days ago, put out a video about Blood Meridian. I haven't watched it. It's like 5 hours, but definitely go give it a shot. It'll be great. But anyway, we're almost at 2 hours now. This will be my longest video. So, and it's strange how it took me the whole book. I did like an hour and 15. Chapter 11 was an hour 40. This is at an hour 50 now for one chapter. So pretty good. Hopefully that algorithm will kick into gear for me. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, guys. There will be a lot more content on this channel. Maybe Blood Meridian. We'll probably go to a different book now, but I'm just so happy everyone came along, and please stay tuned. Thanks so much.